This is the Padua Podcast Network.
I mean, in the midst of all this, everything that's going on and all the bad news we get and rising case counts and surges and deaths and hospitalizations and all the really bad things that are going on, it's easy to forget that many thousands of people have recovered from the COVID-19 disease. Running a Fever episode 220, long-term effects of COVID-19. Well, it's good to be outside and only in the low 70s. Because it's been really hot here. And I'm out here again before 6 a.m. in hopes of getting both a cooler temperature and fewer people here. Problem is it's barely enough light for me to see my notes, but should brighten up enough in the next couple of minutes, I think. And there's already a fisherman out on the water in a boat. The birds are sounding like I don't know, for some reason I think of the United Nations here. This is a big area where birds are congregating and stating their cases. Yeah, so 3 days I've been out in a row. Yesterday I walked with my friend Robert, and the day before I recorded a previous episode. And there's more to come. I've laid out a series that's going to last into next year, probably. Almost certainly, because there will be more updates of the type that I'm kind of giving you today throughout the rest of this year and probably early next year as well, until a viable vaccine is developed for COVID-19. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. I'm starting to get all this terminology worked out and what each thing means. And I've been hearing a lot about long-term effects. And when I say a lot, I mean, it just keeps kind of popping up. In fact, yesterday, when I was here, I overheard someone talking about long-term effects. So, I wanted to find out and get together what is known about the long-term effects. I mean, in the midst of all this, everything that's going on and all the bad news we get and rising case counts and surges and deaths and hospitalizations and all the really bad things that are going on, it's easy to forget that many thousands of people have recovered from the COVID-19 disease. And that, if that's the case, then we should have some information on long-term effects. That is, what's going on with these people after they recover from the disease. and they're no longer feeling the effects of them. Unfortunately, not much is known still. Experts are saying there just isn't enough information yet. Now, I don't know why this section does not have lights. I was talking about how it's hard to read my notes. Part of this trail around Lake Atalanta has lights. The first part that I'm on doesn't. Perhaps I should go the other direction next time I'm out here this early or later at night. Still pretty humid. And I haven't had breakfast. Did hydrate though. This kind of weather, it's very important to hydrate. Continuing with our medical department report on the long-term effects, there was a study that found lung damage resulting in a drop in lung capacity of 20 to 30% in some people who have recovered. Some organs are not sort of on off. You can actually lose parts of them and still function. I believe the liver is one of these, and also the lungs. I know at least one person who has had part of a lung removed and obviously still functions. So yeah, you can lose lung capacity because this is it's considered a respiratory disease. I've also heard that there's some aspects of it that are more about inflammation. But I'm sure we'll get into that in a later episode. It is possible that COVID-19 symptoms, such as the loss of smell and taste, headaches, impaired consciousness, and stroke, may indicate that the virus can cause nerve damage. It's all just kind of speculation based on, how this thing acts and what it causes in people. Any respiratory illness also can affect the brain due to reduced oxygen transfer. This is all from an article I got, I think, from the Mayo Clinic website about neurological aspects. And of course, those references will all be in the show notes at runningfever.com/220. But stroke seems to be occurring more often in patients who've had COVID-19, and other associated illnesses can have long-term effects, even though they aren't directly related to COVID-19. It just seems that the virus makes these diseases worse because of its effects on the respiratory system. Speaking of respiratory system, I've noticed that I don't breathe quite as easily as I do these days as I did before. So anyway, it's good that I'm getting out and getting some practice. This exercise once every 2 or 3 weeks is definitely not what I want. And I asked Robert, I think we're going to try and do this, do a walk once a week. So hopefully that'll help. COVID-19 in some cases, causes acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. And this is a buildup of fluid in the alveoli in the lungs, limiting the ability to exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. And this illness can have long-term effects, such as limited lung capacity, we've mentioned before, psychiatric issues such as PTSD, depression, cognitive impairment, and anxiety due to the trauma of the illness and treatment. I mean, you got to think about if you've ever had shortness of breath. I actually recently, I don't think I've talked about this, but recently, out of the blue, I had some pain in my right side, really closer to the front. And it was kind of up and down in that lower abdomen area. From my bottom of my ribs down, I don't know, half a foot or something like that. And as a result of this, it wasn't painful all the time, but when I took a deep breath, I could feel it. So I could only breathe up to a certain amount, to this shallow breath that I could take. It's really distressing if you can't get oxygen. And this is the first time that I've thought of oxygen and not just air. I thought, well, if I could just get more oxygen with each breath, kind of wished I had an oxygen tank around. Just really strange, but it's very distressing. There's a lot of, it's just scary. It's just like, you ever thought of, if you've ever been underwater, it's kind of like that drowning effect. Pretty scary stuff. So there's trauma associated with that. And there are kidney complications which could lead to a need for long-term dialysis. And poor conditioning due to limited lung and or organ function. It's hard to exercise if you can't get a normal amount of oxygen. One of the advisors to the show told me that inflammation is a key factor in COVID-19, and this affects other organs, including the kidneys, which may require dialysis as a treatment, perhaps long-term treatment. I'm not sure about that. Children with COVID-19 can also later develop pediatric multi-symptom inflammatory syndrome, or PMIS, also known as MIS-C, which can be fatal. The only difference between PMIS and MIS-C is they take the pediatric off the front and add in children on the back. So really, they probably need to just make a decision. But something that's, relatively new, and I've actually got an entire episode on that coming up, most likely next week, because I'm kind of pushing these episodes to the front. For timeliness, although unfortunately it seems like this is going to be a long-term thing, which is why we're talking about it in the long-term mode. So keep in mind, we talk about the death rate and everything. Most patients who die with COVID-19, 97% of the people who die having COVID-19 have what are called comorbidities, which are other causes of death. More than one disease. And these are attributed to, obviously, pre-existing conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and respiratory illnesses such as COPD. And I've heard this anecdotally from people who work in a hospital. From the beginning, it's usually somebody who really was likely to die anyway of something else. The average person who dies and has COVID-19 has 2.7 diseases. So at least one other, maybe two. Bottom line is, real analysis from real data is just hard to find right now. A lot of this stuff is just kind of speculation based on, speculation from people who, know a lot more about this stuff than the average person. Experts, basically. Epidemiologists and other doctors. So they're educated guesses, but there's not a lot of hard analysis, hard data, hard fact going on here. Causal things, causal relationships. So keep that in mind. Morning. However, there's some good news. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NHLBI, which is one of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, is conducting a large study of hospitalized COVID-19 patients. Now, this is called the CORAL study, C-O-R-A-L. I won't give you that whole acronym. It's a coronavirus observation, something or other. This started in June, so keep an eye out for those results. I'm going to try to keep an eye out for those as well. What's my take on all this? Well, it doesn't change the fact that, we got this disease, we got to be careful not to spread it. And that's basically what we're concerned with right now. And the idea that it has long-term effects is just more fuel for that idea. So be careful out there. Morning. Morning. Be careful out there, and we'll get through it. Just try to stay healthy. Try to keep the other people around you healthy. I'm still hoping to, despite all this, I'm still hoping to live a long, happy, healthy, active life right up to the very end. That's what I wish for you too. So if you got the fever, keep it, and if you don't have it, catch it. And I'll talk to you next time on Running a Fever.